Come on. Sit. Good girl. Let's roll. Yeah, look. Hi everyone. So my name is Veronique and this is Jada. Say hi. Hi. Look. She's 11. And so I hope you're enjoying the festive calendar so far. And in our session, both of us, we are gonna look at PowerShell and SharePoint. I hope you enjoy it and we wish you a Merry Christmas. Yeah, say goodbye. Bye. Look. Bye. Welcome everyone to this session on Manage SharePoint and Microsoft Teams with a single PowerShell module. A little bit about me. So my name is Veronique. I am a dual Microsoft MVP for SharePoint and for PowerShell. I work as a solution architect for a Microsoft Gold partner called CPS. I'm sure you guessed it now, but I'm French and I am living in Scotland. I am a course author. I like to blog, and as you've seen, I am a dog lover. So what do we have for the agenda? First, we're going to go very briefly on what is PowerShell and why you should use it. We'll have a look at the current PowerShell modules that we have for SharePoint and Microsoft Teams. There are some important changes for SharePoint when we are using the new PnP PowerShell module on PowerShell Core. What are the benefits of using this particular module? I'll give you some kind of next steps that you can use with the PnP PowerShell module. All right, so what Microsoft is saying about PowerShell. PowerShell is a cross-platform task automation and configuration management framework consisting of a command line shell and scripting language. PowerShell is built on top of the .NET CLR and accepts and returns .NET objects. It might be a little bit overwhelming if you read that, but just remember that everything is an object in PowerShell. Currently, we have two flavors. At this point in time, we have a Windows PowerShell, which is built on top of the .NET framework. It ships with your Windows devices. So if you buy a Windows laptop or a desktop, then Windows PowerShell will be installed on it. And the latest version is 5.1. And we will not have 5.2, 5.3, and so on, because now we have PowerShell Core. It is built on top of .NET Core. It is open source, and you can find the repo on GitHub. And of course, the goal of this was to make it cross-platform. So you can use PowerShell on Windows, Linux, or macOS. Now, why would you use PowerShell? So I'm going to give you just a few examples. Of course, automation, that's the point of PowerShell. So this one was a no-brainer. But sometimes you may not have any graphical interface for what you're trying to do. So you have no other choice but to use PowerShell. You can create some reports and export some data. And of course, it will be much faster with PowerShell. And you can also create those interfaces that you're missing. Now, let me warn you about this one, because I've created a tool with PowerShell to get all the info from a tenant. And if you use PowerShell to do this, you're gonna do it the hard way. If your tool is small, it might be okay. But if you want to build something more complex, I'd say PowerShell is not probably the tool for that. So you've been warned. Let's have a look at the current SharePoint and Microsoft Teams module that we have. On one side, we have the Microsoft modules, and on the other side, we have the community modules. On the Microsoft side, we have CSOM, which is the client-side object model. We have the SharePoint snap-in for SharePoint on-prem. And to be honest, when I started SharePoint, I started on SharePoint 2010. And to this day, although I haven't done any research, to be honest, but it's still a mystery to me why this is called a SharePoint snap-in and not a SharePoint module. We also have the SharePoint Online Management Shell and the Microsoft Teams module. Now let's switch on the other side for the community modules. If you used SharePoint PnP PowerShell before, this is the one you know where we can use it on SharePoint Online and SharePoint On-Prem 2013, 16, and 19. Then we have the PnP PowerShell, which is new, and the one we're going to focus on. And we also have the CLI for Microsoft 365, which also contains a bunch of commands for different workloads. But for this session, the one we're going to focus on is the PnP PowerShell. Before we jump into some demos, I want to talk about the changes that we have on this PnP PowerShell module. First, the name of the module. If you used PnP PowerShell before, it was called the SharePoint PnP module. But now it's not about SharePoint anymore. It's also about Microsoft Teams, and there's some Microsoft Planner commandlets being added. The authentication is a little bit different. You have a little bit more to do than just installing the module. So if you only get started with this, I have a video on my YouTube channel where I've started from scratch by installing PowerShell Core and then installing the module on your machine. So for this part, we're going to need to add the credentials parameter. Despite having our credentials into the credential manager, there's also a change when your admin account that you're using is enabled with MFA. So those are the main changes that you would have from an authentication perspective. Just to be aware that some commandlets have been renamed, and everything that has to do with provisioning has been renamed to the PnP site template and not PnP provisioning template, and the commands that you had with apply have been renamed with invoke. And lastly, but by no means the less important one, PnP PowerShell running on PowerShell Core will not be supported for SharePoint 2013, 16, and 19 on-prem versions. And so this point I think was really important to be aware of. Now let's go into our first demo. It's going to be about SharePoint. We're going to try to find all the checked out files that you have across multiple sites on your tenant. We're going to change column values based on other column values. And we're going to export and import site templates. Our first script is to get all the checked out files that we have currently in our tenant. The first thing we do is just create a couple of variables. We have our tenant name and the path to our CSV file. Next, we connect to the SharePoint Online Admin Center and we provide our credentials. We create a variable to store our results and import our CSV file. Now, this is where the action happens. We create a for each loop because we want to look through all our sites. And because we look through different sites, we need to connect to those different sites. But this time we use the connect PnP online and we provide the site URL that we have in our CSV file. Speaking of which, I'm going to show you the CSV file. This is a very simple file where we only have the site URL and the site name. Once we loop through all our sites, we need to grab all our document libraries. Next, we loop through each library, we get all the items within that library, and we finally look for all the documents which have been checked out. So let's run that script and see what we get. So we have 3 items that are currently checked out. And one thing to note in here is that it's not only giving us the documents that have been checked out, because if you have a look at the last item, it's actually a page. In our second script, we're going to change the value of some columns depending on the value of other columns. Let's have a look at the script first, and then I'll show you what it means in SharePoint Online. The usual is happening in here. We connect to our site and we provide our credentials, and then we target some specific libraries that we have in that site. And for this case, we're going to target every library starting with the word library, and then we loop through each document library and have a look at the items with an over for each loop. So before we go over the 2 if statements, let's see what it looks like in SharePoint Online. So I'm on my site and you can see that I currently have 2 document libraries called library test and library 2, and they will be the ones that we are going to target. So in library test, I have a couple of documents and I just named them specifically so we can see quickly if the changes have worked. Let's have a look at the metadata we have in here. So the columns we are going to be interested in are the type of hotel, the hotel location, the country, and the other comments. And in library 2, we have the same thing. So we have 2 documents, and we have the same columns. Now, for the two if statements. In the first one, if the value that we have in our other comments column matches the letter BB in uppercase and lowercase, then what I want you to do is change the type of hotel, which is the internal name of the column, into bed and breakfast. For the second if statement, if the value of the hotel location matches unknown, then I want to change the value of the country to UK and the hotel location to be blank. And we have a very useful parameter, which is the system update. And what this is going to do, or rather not do, is create a new version when we're going to change those values. So it means that it's not going to change the modified by either. Let's go back to SharePoint Online to see what it means for our documents. The second item, because the other comments column has the BB letters, this should change. But on the third item, we also have those letters, but they are part of a word. If they are not on their own, then we do not want to change anything. So the second item should change, but not the third one. Going to library 2, what should happen here is that the second item should change. And it should change for two reasons. The first one is because it contains the letters BB. Remember, uppercase, lowercase, something should happen. But it will also change the country because the hotel location is set to unknown. So when the hotel location is set to unknown, I want to change the country to UK. It means that this second item will match both conditions that we set. All right, let's go back to the script and run it. There we have it. Let's have a look in SharePoint Online. The modified date is still the same. And we have the type of hotel for the second item that has been changed to bed and breakfast. In library 2, it's the same. The dates haven't changed. And the type of hotel has been changed to bed and breakfast, as well as the country is now set to UK. Perfect. In our last script for SharePoint, we're going to have a look at the export and import site template. And with only those 4 lines, we can get something nice. So let's have a look at SharePoint to see what we're talking about. On this site, which is called the perspective, we already have a navigation. We have some web parts. Everything is already configured. And then we have our target site, which is basically just an out-of-the-box communication site. And I've done nothing on it. So you can see it's completely different. What we are doing here is that we are grabbing the template and we are going to import it into our target site. If you have never used the Get PnP Site template before, I would highly encourage you to look at the documentation because there are way more parameters than what I'm showing you in here. Let's connect first to the perspective site. Then export the template using the Get PnP Site template. And we want to import this site template into our target site. So we just need to connect and use the invoke PnP Site template. Remember, the commands that had apply have been renamed to invoke. All done. So let's have a look in SharePoint and see the results with our target site. We have the navigation. We also have a new design applied. And the images will be for you to change and put your own. And if we have a look at the site pages, all the pages from the source site are here. And that's because of the parameter we used when we exported the template from the source site. Okay, back to the slides. And let's have a look at the benefits of using this PnP PowerShell module. First, we have more than 500 commandlets, which is way more than what you have with the SharePoint Online Management Shell. It's also less typing, as we've seen with the scripts. It is of course cross-platform, so despite running all my script on macOS just to prove a point, you can also use those scripts on a Windows machine or a Linux machine. And at the end, you have one module only for multiple workloads. Now let's go over our second demo, this time about Microsoft Teams. So we're going to get all the Teams, channels, tabs, and privacy settings that we have in our tenant. And we're going to get all the teams that a user is part of. This one is going to be interesting because when I created it, I've run it on PowerShell 5.1. And so I've used two different modules, but then I've changed it. So I'll show you why and how. So the first script that we have is about getting all the information from our teams currently in our tenant. The first thing we need to do is to use the Connect PnP Online. But this time, instead of using a URL, because we're not doing anything on SharePoint, we need to use the scopes parameter. You then choose a permission level. If you go on each documentation for the command, you will see what type of permission you need. And then we use the credentials parameter. Remember, we are on PowerShell Core, so we need to use the credentials parameter. Next, we're going to create a variable called results, where we're going to put all our results. And we're going to start by getting all our teams. So we use the get PnP Teams team commandlet for that. And then we have 3 loops because we need to loop through different information. And in that case, we want 3 things. We want our teams, we want our channels, and finally, we want our tabs. And in the last one, we are creating our own object and gather the properties we are interested in. So let's run that script. And those are our results. We have our teams, the visibility of that team, any channels that we have within that team, and each of the tabs that we have within those channels. Our second script is about getting all the teams that a user is part of, regardless if the user is a member or an owner of that team. And for a change, we're going to make a function. So I create my function, give it a name, and the parameter would be the user UPN, because that's the user I'm going to be searching for. As we've seen in the previous script, we use the Connect PnP Online with the scopes parameter. And then same process, we store our teams in a variable as well as the results. Now, this is the interesting part because when I created this script the very first time, I've created it on PowerShell 5.1. So because we actually need to match the user ID in Teams, and also we're going to do a match in Azure AD, I was using the Azure AD module. So I was using the Connect PnP Online, and then I was using the Connect Azure AD. But now, because I'm doing that on PowerShell Core, I cannot do it with the Azure AD module. So while I was going through the commands in the PnP PowerShell module, there was this command of get PnP AAD user. And so this command will actually allow me to replace completely the get Azure AD user I was using before. So we set the variables to compare the user UPN to the user ID in Azure Active Directory. And basically, if you find a match, give me some information. So in that case, we're going to create an object so we can gather the username, the display name, the role. So that can be an owner or a member, the display name of the team, and the team visibility. And finally, we call our function with the user UPN. So we can see that Alex is part of 3 different teams, and that sometimes is an owner and sometimes is a member. Now, just to prove that we're going to get the correct results for another user, I'm going to change Alex to Miriam and run the script again. And this time we can see that Miriam is part of 5 teams, while Alex was part of 3 different teams. What more can you do with PnP PowerShell? Well, I would suggest that you have a look at the provisioning engine, because this one is really powerful. You can also search for the Microsoft Lookbook, and it will give you a lot of templates that you can choose from. And this is using the provisioning engine, so you can choose a template and apply it in your tenant. We have site scripts and site designs. So those ones are really powerful as well. If you want to create your own template when a user is creating a new site, you will give him or her the possibility to choose amongst multiple designs and columns already created, some branding applied. So definitely have a look at this one. And finally, you can have a look at any integration with Azure, like Azure Functions, and run the PnP PowerShell module on the Azure Cloud Shell. I'm going to give you some useful links to get you started. We have the PnP PowerShell module, obviously, this is on GitHub. We have the CLI for Microsoft 365. Same thing, this is open source, and the maintainers are always happy to get new contributors and any help that you can give. Site scripts and site designs. This URL will give you an overview of what they are. And finally, the Azure Functions, if you want to get started with them as well. And on that note, thank you very much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful Christmas.